members of InsurTech and I, along with David, Chris, and Trent Smith. And this is our third event, and it continues to grow, and I see some familiar faces, which is awesome, which is exactly what we want to do when we build this organization. We wanted to really create a community or space, event space, where people from InsurTech, startups, to carriers, brokers, to solution providers, investors, all come together and connect and learn from each other. And it looks like there's a lot of need and demand based on the turnout we have here. So, I just want to thank you again. I'm happy to, do a little part in actually helping that connection happen. So, really appreciate you coming. So we have, I'm really excited today, especially because we have a lot of great speakers who are going to be sharing really great, interesting insights and a lot of exciting announcements as well. So we'll be sharing a little bit of announcements before I hand it off to the panel discussion. But first, just a few words from our sponsors. With our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to host these events, so just wanted to first thank them and kind of introduce what they do, and they definitely they play a huge part in the InsurTech ecosystem as well. So first, Evershire Sullivan is a law firm, global top 50 law firm with focus in the insurance industry, specifically in the M&A and regulatory law. So if you're looking for law firm partners, definitely look for them. Hyperscience, they turn document into data to reduce costs and time in underwriting process. It's great, startup companies making great strides in this space. Vonage enables digital transformation with enterprise-grade API solution to help insurance brands communicate better with their customers. And LiveGenic, which is a real-time virtual claim collaboration platform that helps carriers transform their claim process. And finally, Glomi is a mobile-first market learning solutions to sell and compliance training insurance companies. They all play a really integral role in the insurance industry, taking it to the next level. So thank you guys for sponsoring us. Appreciate it. Okay, so some important dates, upcoming important dates. These are first slide on events. So our next event, this is a partnership event we are hosting with Privacy Tech. And it's on big data analytics and enterprise privacy. And this is going to be a more smaller event with longer, it's a full day event, which we'll be hosting in Times Square. And so hopefully you can make that. And then December 12th is our event hosted by our partner Stacey Brown from InsurTech Hartford. Holiday Bash, so if you're in the neighborhood, hopefully you can make it. And then it's a coverage here. I don't know who's subscribed to coverage here. Okay, I see maybe 20%. I think every one of you should probably subscribe to it. I'm not saying this; they don't sponsor anything, but I just think they have really great content. And so definitely I encourage you to.
And it's free.
It is free, yes. It is free, yeah. And they host these networking events every few months in Times Square actually as well. And so hopefully you can make that. I went there a couple months ago. It was great. We made a lot of great connections. And then our partner in Silicon Valley, SCIA, they are hosting their 2-day event on digital ecosystem on February 11th and 12th. And then finally, March 19th is going to be our full-day event. I'll share more details on this later. And some additional InsurTech dates. So the first one is if you're an InsurTech looking to expand into Europe, this is like you have to do this. You should apply to InsurTech community. They are actually a consortium accelerator that's built by 20 insurance carriers, including the biggest reinsurance carrier in the world, I'm sure you know the name. And they pick 40 companies, keep their own annually. And so if you're really looking to expand to Europe, they especially looking for US companies looking to expand. So I highly recommend you apply. Their deadline is December 13th. Next is Rainmaking. I don't know if you guys know the name Rainmaking. Rainmaking is a parent company of Star Bootcamp. And Star Bootcamp hosts Hartford InsurTech Hubs in Hartford. And which is probably the best InsurTech accelerator in the world. And Rainmaking has this program where if you're an employee of a corporation and you want to actually do some social good and you want to create some kind of business or program for it, then you apply and they actually help you build that product. So if you're interested in this, apply on the 31st. And finally, we are actually we're going to be doing a startup competition in the March event. And so there'll be, I'll share some more details on this, but the deadline for this, if you're a startup, please apply. There's only upside on paying it, so that application deadline is January 23rd. So just I want to share more details about our March 19th event, the Spring 2020 conference, and the startup competition. So this is going to be, I'm really excited about this event. I'm excited about today's event too, but really excited about this one too. It's going to, for the conference part, there will be 7 panels, with topics from selling to millennials to feminists go to mind, we'll have keynotes and 6 TED Talks. And obviously a lot of networking. We're going to use one of the apps that allow you to do more networking, and we'll actually hopefully have more attendees for that as well. And then we'll also have startup competition pitch to investors and carriers and brokers. There are going to be 2 tracks. Early stage startups will be judged by investors, and then growth stage startups who are looking for customers, they'll be judged by the potential customers, carriers, brokers. And there is going to be $300,000 in prize. So hopefully that gets you excited to apply to InsurTech. And we will be announcing all this soon with all the details. So how many events did I talk about today? Okay, a lot, right? A lot of information. So you will, newsletters coming with all the different details. And all the information and links will be coming to your inbox Monday morning, and so you don't have to look for it. But obviously, if you look on the web, you can find all this information. But just for the March event, just one thing I ask: if you want to attend, please join the waitlist. There's going to be a waitlist, and then we'll allow you. Once you join the waitlist, we'll make sure we guarantee a spot so you come in. And then if you're a startup, just apply. There's nothing to lose. And everything to gain. All right, so that's it in terms of announcements. So now let's get to the panel sessions. Great. So I first want to introduce my co-founder and moderator, David Chris. He has been part of the InsurTech community for the past 4 or 5 years. I'm also the innovation program director for SBIA. And has been working for and advising about other InsurTech startups. I'll hand it off to David. But before I do, there's an app that we use to ask questions. So if you go to slido.com, enter X459. Any questions you have, the panel, the moderator will look at that and ask them on your behalf. Right? So, David.
All right. Thanks, Tony. I really appreciate the opportunity to welcome our panelists. So I'll ask our 3 panelists to come up: Dawn, Xander, and Oleg. We're really fortunate today to have these 3 panelists. Xander is from New York, Dawn came all the way from Connecticut, and Oleg is from Philadelphia. And the purpose of this panel was all the way originated back from InsurTech Connect. And Tony and I went there and we talked to a lot of startups and a lot of carriers. And really what we had heard from them is that we have a lot of startups who we're talking to, but the biggest challenge we have is if we're doing a proof of concept or a pilot, and we're trying to roll out a commercial application, what can we do to make sure it's successful? And the numbers are really bleak. Like, most of the POCs don't really work out. And you're going to hear from the second panel the carrier's perspective on some of the reasons why and some of the challenges. But I think let's start with the optimism. Let's hear from the people that have really made an impact. So I'll go down and introduce our panelists. So first, we have Xander Steele, and he's responsible for the front-end part of the process for hyperscience, implementing these proof of concepts. And like Tony explained, hyperscience is about pushing through the digitization process, both on underwriting and claims. Dawn, in the middle, I was fortunate enough to be at their startup bootcamp event for a startup that I was advising from San Francisco. And they do just an incredible job of bringing together the carriers in Hartford and connecting them up with the right startups. And Dawn will tell you, but she makes the carriers make a pledge that if they want to have a commitment to work with the startups, they actually have to do it. And last but certainly not least is Oleg Shestakov. Oleg and I have known each other for probably 5 years. One of the first InsurTechs I worked with, we built their technology for them, and almost a dozen startups, he's helped them through the technology process and to help them get their first clients. So we'll be going through a series of questions. So I will start off the panel. So I know a lot of you guys may not fully understand the difference between a proof of concept or POC, a pilot, and a full commercial implementation. So I welcome Dawn to start us off and share a little bit of background.
Sure. So a lot of times when you're working with a carrier and they're sort of trying to look at your technology and tool, usually there's many people who need to sort of, I'll call, kick the tires on that tool. And part of kicking that tires is just sort of bringing it in, showing many people in the organization. For those of you who work at carriers, and I did for 30 years, there's so many people in the organization that need to take a look at it and ask different questions. We try to get it so that everyone who could possibly ask a question is in the room, because that can, in and of itself, can take multiple weeks and or months. Because like, oh yeah, I want you to go visit this person so they can ask you a question. I want you to go visit this person so they can ask you a question. So getting as many people involved first so they can actually see the tool itself and kick the tires is a great idea, right? Which is really sort of just showcasing what you have. Then when you get into proof of concept, they can be formed in a lot of different ways, right? To actually prove that either your tool works on the insured's data, or it works within their system, or it integrates the way it should integrate, right? And with that, our advice always is to try and build that in steps. And so you start with something and say, okay, what's the most important piece of this? What are we really looking to prove? Because what sometimes happens is you might prove one thing, and then they'll come back and say, you know what, but does it really do this? And can it also do this? And you end up in this little circle for a really long time and really never get to your full project. And so what we advise is that proof of concepts are broken out into small stepping stones and keep that interest going and keep proving that it actually works.
Thanks, Dawn. So yeah, I think that's a really good intro to you guys for proof of concept. And a couple weeks ago, Oleg and I were talking about, well, is the proof of concept even necessary? And if you're thinking about having a relationship with the carrier, how do you create the stages like Dawn was talking about to really ensure that you're setting yourself up for success? So I open that question to Oleg, and then to Xander. I think if you could comment on, from your perspective in implementing the POCs, what are some of the things that you do to speed up the process with those steps?
Thanks, David. Great question. Now, to set the stage a little, I'd like to offer two almost opposite opinions on what POCs are. The first being, POC is about the cultural fit. We all know technology. It's taken 15 minutes, half an hour, a couple of days to test the technology. POC is not about the testing the technology. It's about understanding if this tool is going to be a fit to the people who use it on an everyday basis. Can they adopt it? Can they inject it into their process? Can they use it every day? Now, second, almost opposite opinion is that POC is almost about optics, decreasing the risks, how this whole process will look from outside. Well, let me give you an example. We were working with insurance company, and we offered them two options. The first option is 3 months POC paid. And the second option was full-time contract, 3 months, and they can cancel anytime. The second option looks more logical. They can get the same value for free, but they select the PSC. Why? They don't want to have. They don't want to have extra risks. Coming to a more practical level, my advice about PSC is there's a way not to run PSC and get the contract. You don't run PSC. There are no easy PSCs, especially when you are looking at it as a real users and real data. When the organization is just starting, the PSC is probably the best bet of going into insurance organization. And the reason is this stuff will help you understand the culture of insurance company. They will learn a little bit more about you. And then you also will de-risk the whole process. Now, if you're the established company and you have a couple of dozen contracts under your belt, you have a better bet of going with the full implementation going forward.
Sandra, do you want to share your perspective?
Sure. I think you said a couple of things there. One was are POCs necessary, and then how to make them successful. For hyperscience specifically, what we do is automate the data ingestion process using machine learning. So carriers get tons and tons of documents every year. They have to do something with them. Typically, that's done manually today. And what's interesting about that problem is that promises have been made over the years that there's technology that can do this, like trust us, believe it, but it's fallen short. And so I think for us specifically, yes, POCs are necessary because people have been burned before on this. They've been promised something, and it hasn't been delivered. That said, though, we actually call them something different in hyperscience. We call them TVEs, or technical validation events. And I think it's important to tell you why we do that. We very much look at it as a validation, not as a concept. And so there's a lot of stuff we try to do up front. For example, we try to get sort of business and technical alignment. Like, can this actually do what you need? Do we have the business stakeholders behind this? And how we iron out what the success criteria actually look like, and almost to the point of, hey, if we check these 7 boxes, is there a path to us doing business together? And I think if you frame it that way to your customer, you can say, hey, we don't want to waste your time, you don't want to waste our time. Let's do all this upfront work to make sure that we're marching down the right path, and not doing a POC too early, but rather doing a TVE at the right time to validate everything that you've advertised.
Thanks, Sandra. I really like the idea of TVE. So I wanted to shift for a moment into some of the challenges and pitfalls and kind of dig a little bit into some of those success criteria. So I'll start with Dawn. I'll be curious from your perspective, working with the startups in the previous 3 batches, what have been some of the success criteria with Aetna or Cigna or some of your partners?
Yeah, so from a carrier perspective, I think a lot is defining what your process is within your organization, and some have it better defined than others. Some put startups through the same process they put vendors through, or the same process they put consultants through, and when that happens, it really slows down that entire process because most startups aren't at that same point, don't have the same materials to answer those questions, those kinds of things. So one thing that we've found that works really well is to make sure that it's clearly defined what that process is to actually even enter into the organization for anything. So that's we call it the do not pass go. If you don't have this, it's do not pass go. So it could be things like cyber or anything else that says, this is a do not pass go. Because the worst thing that can happen is you get a really interested person in a carrier, and then all of a sudden it's like, oops, you don't have this, and you're restarting all over again. And that's sort of not a good practice to go through as well. And then I think, to echo on a point that was mentioned earlier, is that it's really around making sure you define what the success is and what the outcome is. Sometimes people get so invested in their own technology, it becomes, well, let me show you how great this is. Instead of asking the question of the carrier or the insured, what does a positive outcome look like for you? And what might that be, and how can I show that with this project? And I think if you do that, it saves a whole lot. And I know everyone worked really, really hard on on their company and really, really hard on their technology, but you have to turn it around a little bit and ask that question, and I think when you do that, you get a lot better result.
Hey, so I want to build off of some of the points that you made, Don, and I know that it's important that you line things up so you don't run into problems, but I'd be curious, pulling from some of your perspective, what are the common pitfalls that happen? And I know you've had to with the European carriers go through GDPR, which is tough for a lot of people, so maybe you could share some insights.
Certainly. Here are the top 3 pitfalls on my list, and GDPR is probably number 4 and number 5. So the first being selecting POC objectives. A lot of startups and technology companies don't realize if they don't set the right objectives and metric in the beginning, it would be practically impossible to change them during the course of the POC. Metrics should be easy to understand, easy to measure, easy to explain, and not too many of those. 2 to 5, something that would be really important for the insurance carrier. The second pitfall is POC team. Remember, people who are working with you beside the POC, it's not the same group of people who are going to be executing the POC. And you have to work with your client to pick the right POC team who's going to be interested in the results of the POC. POC team shouldn't be too small, POC team shouldn't be too big, just about the right size for a couple of product reviews. And the third pitfall going to be the POC communication. It's also really important to set up the right communication process in the beginning of the POC. What meetings we're going to have, what are the milestones, what are the objectives of each meeting. A lot of technology companies and we help with that. They don't see, if you don't set it up in the beginning, then you won't be able to change the process through the course of the POC. Some example from my past, we engaged with one of the insurance company and we have great communication with them. It was through meetings they love our product and they test our product as a POC team. And then for 2 or 3 weeks we have absolutely zero communication when we see that they're using the product, but they are not calling us, they're not emailing us, they're not responding. And that's because each group would have their different culture. Luckily, that POC was very successful for us, but it's a good lesson learned. If you don't set the right communication in the beginning, you won't have a way to change it.
Well, that's a really great checklist. I wish I had the opportunity to write notes on that one. Hope you guys did, but we have it all recorded. So I wanted to build on some of the threads of that from Xander, which is that people are an essential process. And Don had mentioned earlier that you try and get all of the right people in the room. And I'd be curious, Xander, from your perspective, who are the best champions within an insurance company? Is it the technical folks? Is it the business unit leaders? Is it the innovation people? Who have you found is best to champion for you?
Yeah, there's a few things. I think there's probably 3 main things that we look for. First is someone who directly feels the pain of the problem we're solving. They need to be motivated to get something done. They need to sort of feel that pain directly. I think the second is they need to have significant influence. Typically, a huge part of the selling that's done is actually done behind closed doors. It's not done, with the vendor in the room. And then the third, which is related, is somebody who we feel strongly can sell effectively on our behalf. So someone who is persuasive and influential and has, rapport, and probably has been with the organization for a while. I think for us at HyperScience, that usually ends up being somewhere on the operations side. So we're dealing with document processing and data processing, sort of fundamental to the insurance business. And that's oftentimes those operations folks that are sort of owning that P&L and really kind of feeling that pain day in and day out, employing the people that are doing the manual work today, and dealing with the bad things that happen when more data is passed downstream, or people get sent sort of the wrong information, or all of those kinds of things.
So I want to shift to mastering the procurement process. Imagine as a startup that you've had a successful POC or pilot, and now you're wondering, what do I need to do to take it to the next step, and how do I get a commercial contract, which is really the golden currency for everyone. So wanted to start with Dawn, and I know you've had a few startups that have been through your batch, and a number of them are really far along. Like I know Arius Analytics has some pretty substantial traction in Asia, and I'd be curious from your perspective, what do you kind of see as the key items to go from first step to full commercial?
Yeah, so it's a really good question because it's sometimes that kind of fall off the cliff area. Has anyone ever been in there where it's like the radio silence, like nothing happened? You're like, oh, really great POC and nothing, right? And so the transition is a really key point, right? And so setting up the objectives to say, if this is successful, what does the commercialization actually look like? And what needs to happen to kind of get there, and making sure it doesn't fall off of that cliff. And a lot of times, I'm lucky in our accelerator that I get to play both sides and that I get to talk to the insurers and the startups. But a lot of times it isn't that they're not interested, it's that they're really, really busy and there's a whole list of other things that they're working on or a whole list of other startups that they're working on. That's a good thing. But also there's another piece where they're really not interested and don't like saying no. We advise our carriers that the worst thing you can do is not say no, because a startup will move on. So if you are a carrier and you're not interested, just be honest. You know, just tell them, hey, we can't do this right now. But if you're a startup, also try to understand why it's a no, right? Because that's a learning of how to do it better next time to kind of move forward through that. The last thing I'm going to say, when you actually get to that commercialization, there's a whole heck of a lot of legal work, and insurers have a lot of lawyers, a big, usually procurement process. They'll get you a contract, and I've sat down with many startups who go, oh my God, this doesn't make any sense to me. Because I worked in a carrier, I know sometimes they actually, by mistake, give them the wrong type of contract. Not on purpose. It's the business person didn't tell the procurement person that this was the kind of deal that was happening, so they'll send a wrong contract. So the startup's looking at it like, this doesn't make any sense to me, and they're afraid to go back, and I'm like, no, they actually gave you the wrong contract. You need to go back. So don't be, that process always isn't sort of perfect, and sometimes there's some mistakes there as well.
So I wanted to remind you guys that we want to get your questions as well. So if you see on the screen, slido.com, if you go to it on your phone and type in the code, which is X459, you can type questions. So when we roll into this last question, we'll have some questions that we can view from the audience. So the last question I wanted to ask is for Oleg and Xander. And Dawn kind of started to hint at some of the challenges that might happen in legal, but I think if you're a startup, what do you do to make sure internally you're ready for the compliance and procurement process that's about to happen? What kinds of things can you do to set up both internally and with maybe external partners like professional service providers to help you?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I'd like to spend 1 second on that about getting from insurance companies. What we found is it's really difficult to get definite no, but our question, 95% question would be, will it happen this year? Obviously, it will happen in the next 6 months. And that gives some ease to the insurance company. Like, yeah, we're a little bit busy this year, it's not going to happen this year. And then it doesn't mean the door is closed. You can come back at the end of the year and say, hey, well, this year is better for you. Answering David's question, I see there are several factors to be successful with procurement, working with POCs, full contract implementation. First of all, it's a communication with the procurement team. And I've worked with many startup founders, and not everybody would have a good vibe of the procurement people. I mean, they are negotiating against you, but those are really, really, really important people. You want to be friendly with them. They will be the one. Second is security. It's really important to be ready. Your POC will start when negotiating for the contract. You probably want to have your security policy and security certification and all other documents. Sometimes it sounds difficult to get through certification, policies, disaster recovery processes, but it's not that difficult realistically. In 6 to 12 months, you can prepare the right set of documentation with the right people. And lastly, I'd like to touch on the legal review process and give some comments. I work with many legal teams, and there is one common gap. Your lawyer will point to all the legal gaps in the document, but not necessarily those legal gaps are going to be the business gaps. So they're going to return to your document, 30 pages on this document, you're going to have 50 comments, highlights, edits, and you're basically negotiating with a carrier legal team. What lawyers don't tell you is some items are really critical for the company on the business level, and some items are not, like, or going to be the issue of this item is like, hey, if this happened, and that happened, and that happened, the company would lose $5,000 to $10,000. So my recommendation is find the right legal team, which either will inform you of real business risks, or work with a legal team to understand all the business risks of all items.
Sandra, did you want to add to that?
Sure. Procurement. It's a fun topic. There's a few things I think you can do to be successful here. I think the first is just don't be afraid of them. In fact, I often like to ask early, like, who should we be working with on your sourcing team or procurement team? One thing procurement really doesn't like is being left out of discussions. And if you're not careful, your potential buyers or your champions or your executive sponsors might think, oh, we'll just involve them like when we need them later. Well, that's a good way to sort of show up to an upset procurement person, and there's actually nothing harder to negotiate with than an upset procurement person. So involve them early and just say, hey, who should we be working with? And let's get them involved early. Let's, like, you know, get the paperwork started, you know, this kind of stuff. I think the second is just related to, you know, how startups need to think about the way that they're involved with the carrier. Startup is a very long, sort of small organization. Carriers are very big and global. There's a lot of terms in contracts, sort of what Oleg was mentioning, that are crucial for carriers that you may not even notice as a startup, and so it's good to be clear with their legal team up front, like, hey, what are the things that are non-negotiables for you in here? Let's just get that out of the way so we don't sort of try to, you know, go back and forth unnecessarily. And I think the third, and this is sort of specific to hyperscience, but we've created a way to deploy our product behind our customers' firewall, so in infrastructure that they control or maintain, which in many cases can ease the burden of the info security sort of portion of compliance and ease a lot of that sort of risk mitigation, and in many times can sort of eliminate large portions of the contract. We are not sort of taking carriers' data in any case, and so that's been super helpful for us to offer our solution behind their firewall as well.
If I can pick up on one point related to what Sandra said, big companies, small companies, sometimes it is possible just to ask them. I had a very anecdotal story when I was negotiating the deal with an insurance company, and some payment terms. They insisted on 60, we went 60 days. We like asked at 30, payment 30 days, and we go on cycle and cycle and cycle. And then I just decided to ask, like, hey guys, I completely understand you. We're a big company, we use probably not more than 30 and 60. At the start of small company, it's really important for us. Please help. And they agreed right away.
That's a really good perspective, Oleg. I think sometimes it's important to realize there's humans in the process. So We have time for roughly 3 questions. So I'm going to kind of do a round robin, 1 question for each of the panelists, but definitely some of the questions I saw in there are good for the second panel, so we'll have David Bradford pick up on some of those. So the first question, I think is probably good for Oleg, but feel free to pipe in Xander on this one. And that question was about time boxing. How long should a POC last, and should you set limitations on that?
It's a really good question, but there is no one answer. Because if you look at insurance companies, even companies in the same space, of the same size, of the same type, there is no two companies which are similar to each other. And each insurance company would have their own process. We had proof of concept as quick as several weeks, and then found it's done and moved forward. And on the opposite side, we had really anecdotal story when the client started APC with us. And the AC ended, and they didn't want to negotiate the contract. They're like, hey, can we have another month, and then another month, and then another month? So we're working with them 3 years on the basic terms, so they're paying us elevated amount of money every month by usage, but it's still kind of the AC stage.
Thanks, Oleg. So next question is for Xander, and this is about pricing for POC. So how do you set the pricing, and how do you ensure that that pricing is suitable for the carriers?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think most vendors aren't in the business of selling POCs, and so when you sit down and think about it, like, is $10,000 or $50,000 or whatever you're thinking of charging for this thing actually useful to me as a startup company, especially if you're in software as a service where the only thing anybody cares about is annual recurring revenue. POCs are typically not recurring. So something that I think we've done pretty well is start up front by saying, hey, our POCs are typically paid, and we kind of set that expectation. And then many times they'll say, well, we don't have funding for POCs, and so then I think that gives us an opportunity to make some asks and say, okay, maybe we can make an exception this time, and we'll do our POC free of charge, but here are all the things that I need from you up front. And I think that goes back to the checklist I was talking about earlier, which is, business and executive sponsors, success criteria outlined. We sort of met with the team on site and sort of agreed face to face that this is what good looks like. So I guess in summary, I would always lead with the fact that you do in fact charge for POCs, but I would reserve the right to grant exceptions when necessary if you feel like it's important to get a few more things out of that carrier that you think you need to be successful.
All right, so last question is for Dawn. Since you had brought up the legal perspective, the question is, how do you get the right legal talent? And I know Darren from Eversheds is going to be on our second panel, so maybe he has some more thoughts on that, but I know you work with a lot of startups through that process, so I'd be curious, what should be in-house, what should be to a firm, and how do you balance that?
Yeah. So how we do it in our accelerator, we actually have a lot of lawyers who come in to give some pro bono time to the startups, and part of that is your comfort level with the lawyer themselves, right? So do you have a rapport with that lawyer? Do you trust what they say? Kind of what is their experience? And there's not sort of one law firm that works for everyone. You have to really be comfortable with that and ask questions on how they've worked with startups before, how do they address the situation, those kinds of things. We do a couple of events which are like mock term sheet negotiation events and a couple other things to kind of showcase different legal firms' expertise and what they work on.
Thanks, Dawn. So does panelists have any additional comments that they want to add or thoughts to leave with the audience?
Negotiating this is not easy, so I'd like to wish everybody the best luck in succeeding with those. I'll probably speak from 3 of us. If you have any questions or anything we can do to help, please feel free to find us in the crowd and reach us on the event.
Happy to help.
Me too.
Awesome. So we're going to jump into a 15-minute break. So it is 7:10 now. So if you guys need a bio break or just want to grab a water, please come back at, 10 minutes. So please come back at 7:20, and we will start the second panel. All right, so we're back for round 2, and from this time, we're going to be looking at it from the opposite side, from the carrier perspective. So I want to introduce our moderator, David Bradford. You're really fortunate to have him because he was one of the founders of one of the earliest InsurTechs, and that InsurTech was started 20 years ago, and it's called Advisen. They provide data on claims to some of the largest insurance carriers, and they have a database of very big claims, over $10 million, for almost everything that's happened over time. So David not only launched that, but he launched a publishing platform called Front Page News. It has over 500,000 people that read it on a regular basis, and a conference organization. So he's really been tied into the insurance and InsurTech world for a long time. So I'm really proud to have him as your moderator.
Great, thank you, David. Good evening. I'm going to do something a little different. You have your question, you got a really great question. I'm going to try to monitor questions as we go and work them in. So if you see me looking at my phone, I'm not checking my messages. I'm looking for your questions. But this is great to be here. My first go around with the startup was in 1989. And it was a very innovative little insurance company at that point, completely different than anything else out there at the time. So it was a challenge to get investors to understand what we were doing. But the company was a success. It's 30 years later, it's still going strong. And you know, after that, I was like, this is easy, you know. But it's not easy. It's really hard. And you know, there's a real challenge to be able to bring new products, new companies to fruition, and to be able to plug them into the insurance industry. So we're going to talk about success factors and really how to make this all work from the carrier perspective, and also from the vendor perspective in terms of how they work on a day-to-day basis. So rather than me read CVs, I might ask my panelists to introduce themselves. So Megan wants to start for us.
Great, thank you, David. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Megan Curtis, and I'm a director on Europe's corporate venture team.
Brian?
Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Gilman. I'm Vice President of Solutions Marketing at Vonage.
Hi, everyone. I'm Darren Barrera. I'm a partner at Evershed Sutherland. My practice focuses on insurance regulatory and transactional.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I'm Victor Dan. I'm on one of Prudential's strategy teams focusing on individual life insurance and annuities, particularly in organic growth.
Great, thank you, panelists. And we're going to start by talking about how to go about selecting the right startup. And Victor, I want to start with you. You know, the path towards a strategic acquisition typically begins with the needs of business units within an organization. How do you go about identifying those needs and just creating some sort of understanding of what you're actually going to look for when you go out for investment?
Sure, thank you, David. So for us, it really starts with the strategic planning process. And what we do there, we are identifying and we define our problem statements. What do we really want to solve as an insurance carrier? And then we try to separate them sort of in food groups, right? You know, whether we want to enable our distribution, whether we want to accelerate our technology, focus on customer experience. So once we have those buckets well defined, then that's a critical stage in the process where we try to match, you know, problem statements with solutions that, you know, come from the, you know, InsurTech companies and FinTech companies. And that's sort of the critical part because, as you can imagine, as you know, serving the InsurTech landscape, it's really like drinking from a fire hose. You know, there's so many solutions out there, and for us, it's important to move with speed. And to do that, you know, it's important to really be able to understand the solution that the InsurTech company is providing, and really be able to understand sort of the match, right, between what we're trying to solve, between our company and they're trying to do. And oftentimes, for a large company, we're not trying to solve problems end-to-end. We're looking for a modular solution. We're looking for somebody who come to help us with a specific issue and, you know, add that modular to a whole series of servicing or, you know, challenges that we have. It's very hard to have something solved end-to-end. So we try to, tackle our problems in a modular way.
So, thank you, Victor. You know what you're looking for. You go out and you can start to talk to startup companies. Startup companies don't necessarily know what your criteria are, but you're going to have that first meeting with them. So, what is it that they should be focusing on? What should they be communicating to you in that first meeting?
Absolutely. So first it's got to be, there needs to be some homework done in advance to make sure that, their solution really fits well with our needs. I have, and not to discourage anybody from any sort of sector to contact us, but, we are life insurance, financial wellness, group insurance, annuities provider. Things like, let's say, auto insurance or home insurance are maybe not the top priority. So it's important to kind of really, start with, what is the solution and how it fits with what we're trying to solve. And, immediately afterwards, we need to understand really well how is that going to fit in with our strategy. I mean, for us, everything comes, with our strategy, with our, as I mentioned earlier, with the problem statements. And the quicker, the startup can articulate how their capability or technology, enablement can address a specific need in a crisp way, the faster the conversation goes. Typically, our senior executives have, as Don mentioned earlier, they have a lot on their plates. So, they would give, about a 30-minute meeting. And that's really sort of the important way to crisply articulate how is that solution tying into, the problems that we need to solve. So understanding the problems first, it's important to be able to come up with a solution.
So Megan, doing my research for this panel, I came across a Forbes article from March talking about your organization, your life. A very impressive history of $200 million of investment, 30 plus deals, 150 plus POCs. You guys are busy, you're seeing a lot. So, what criteria are you using to determine the startup is right? The various strategic acquisitions as opposed to more of a financial acquisition? Or how are you actually looking at it?
Sure. So in addition to putting capital to work in startups and venture capital funds, we also have a business development team, which I'm a member of, and we're focused on sourcing and introducing strategically relevant technologies to our business units within New York Life. So imagine a large 175-year-old insurance company. We have our insurance business, we have an investment business, we have a technology business, corporate business, etc. So that's our total addressable market, so to speak, which is interesting because it is limited, meaning we only have one head of benefits, one CISO, one president. So that network is tight-knit, which is wonderful. But the exciting part is that the startup ecosystem is limitless, and we focus on identifying those companies that are relevant and have a future impact on New York Life.
Darren, from a legal perspective, when a company acquires or invests in or has a joint venture with the startup, they're buying the entrepreneurial spirit, they're buying the innovative vision, they're buying the technical expertise in there. So you're sometimes sort of buying a Mustang, but you still got to ride this thing. But you don't want to hem it in too much with too heavy contractual terms that you have to have the controls there. So how do you go about finding that balance between good contractual controls there and encouraging the entrepreneurial spirit of the organization?
Sure. So I think when reviewing these types of engagements, it's important to keep in mind that the startup and the carrier are approaching it from very different places. For the startup, this might be their whole world. Their number one priority is to see the project get off the ground and see it be successful. For the carrier, success is also important, but you also need to remember that for the folks working on it, it might just be a side project, many side projects that they're working on. And their day-to-day job is to keep the enterprise in business. And it might be a multi-billion-dollar enterprise that they're focused on. So that really colors the engagement between folks. That said, the carriers that I've seen be most successful in this space have a dedicated team that share that entrepreneurial spirit. They're ready to ride Mustang, and they're ready to dedicate the time to go through the bumps and bruises that come with the startup experience. Also, it's important to keep in mind that drafting the contract is only as helpful as it will be to seek damages if there's a breach, right? For most startups, they don't have a ton of assets. And so, do you really want to devote all of your time to nailing down every single comma or period in the contract? Or do you want to balance that with good due diligence and ongoing compliance and integration with the business? So you know what's going on, you know what you're getting into, and you can avoid problems before they arise.
There was a question from the last session that actually is pretty relevant to this panel. And I want to see that in here because I think it's Vic, I want to ask you about that. The question had to do with the looking at the financials of a startup operation. Obviously, you don't want to buy a company that's going to be financial problems to you going forward. So how do you go about assessing the financial viability of an early stage company?
Well, so a little different than you do with sort of a traditional, more mature company. And for us, it really starts with again with the strategy and how it fits well with our strategy. And I'm sure as you've all seen recently, Prudential has done a large acquisition over the summer. We bought a 2.5-year-old company called Assurance IQ for about $2.4 billion. And trying to apply the traditional valuation models, trying to do a DCF, right, on a company that doesn't have a lot of free cash flow or doesn't have a lot of book value, may not work. So the idea is really to understand first how the startup fits with your overall strategy, how their capabilities connect with what you have to provide, and how together you're able to either address a larger market or to do things better or faster. So that's where it all starts. And then when it comes to the financials, we are trying to understand how will this company evolve when they become part of us, right? How would the customer funnel, for example, expand when they become part of Prudential? What's going to be the conversion rate of the shoppers that, for example, try to purchase those solutions once they become part of Prudential? Whether or not, there's one company that we work with that it's a great concept, but they need a brand to go with that. It's all about the life insurance, it's all about trust. It's all about the belief that somebody will be there for a beneficiary in 20 years or 30 years when they need to, when the family, for example, may need to access their benefits. So being able to assess those metrics first before you go into the income statement or the book value is very important to kind of get a picture of the actual startup.
Thanks. But you bring up the Assurance IQ deal. So Judy, let's stick with that for just a moment because that was obviously a very large acquisition. The feedback from the analyst community was pretty positive on that for the most part. Your stock went up 3% the next day after the deal was announced. So, there's always diversity of opinion, and I'm sure that there was the naysayers in there as well. I mean, how do you prepare for and deal with that kind of feedback when you're dealing with something of this size and so visible in the marketplace?
Sure. So Assurance was a fairly unique transaction for Prudential. I mean, when you look historically at the transactions that we've done in the past, Prudential was typically an acquirer of large, mature companies that another insurance company would like to divest. And then we will leverage our financial strengths and our balance sheet to make the combination work well. Assurance was very different, right? They were 2.5-year-old, about 120 people in Bellevue, Washington. Their balance sheet was about $10 million, and it was a very fast growth story. So it's not surprising that when people look at why a company like Prudential spent $2.4 billion to acquire a 2.5-year-old company. It is actually the second largest transaction we've done in the U.S. space in the last 20 years. It's not surprising that people will be curious and will try to understand, well, what made us believe that this is going to work. And again, it comes, with the way that they truly accelerate our number one strategic priority, which is financial wellness. Prudential, it's all about financial wellness, and assurance is the catalyst that's going to help us accelerate that. And they're doing that in a very unique way. First of all, I'm sure you've seen that a growing number of individuals, like to use the digital, the online medium to do research for life insurance, for annuities, for almost anything. But what's unique about them is that they also do that with a human element. So at the end of the process, they realize that, everyone, including millennials and Gen Zs, they want to speak to an agent, to an expert, to have the purchase. They also address a market that we historically have not addressed, which is the mass market. Prudential was typically a mass affluent service provider and carrier. Assurance looks at a mass market people. So for us, what was really important is that complementary solution that they provided, as opposed to kind of the backlash on, the high price or, the financials.
Great, thank you. So Megan, you do a lot of deals in New York Life, so I'm sure you've got some best of and worst of stories in this summer. Can you talk about one of your best engagements and what made it good?
Okay, I'll start with the best engagement. It's always good to start on a positive note. So an area that's really exciting to me within New York Life Ventures is focusing on what we call net new opportunities. So startups that are solving a problem that's existing but has never been tackled with technology before. And an example that we are really proud of is an implementation of Vault, formerly known as Student Loan Genius, which is a company that helps employers provide their employees with student loan repayment programs. And I was laughing with the head of our team earlier today that there hasn't really been much innovation in the benefit space since I think it was the 1980s with the 401k, which I guess is really not that innovative after all. But we're really proud of our benefits team taking that initiative to help to support our employee population.
And worst stuff?
I'll save you guys the nightmares and perhaps reframe it as some piece of advice. So Dawn talked a lot about this earlier, but make sure as a startup that you're hiring a team that has expertise in being able to support a large incumbent's review process. So that's everything from legal to corporate insurance to information security. And I zero in specifically on legal and insurance. So legal, the advice would be hire an attorney that can speak client and also knows your product, because nothing is more frustrating than working through a POC and your attorney has no idea what the POC is about. Like, that's just not productive for anybody. And then on the insurance side, corporate insurance is so incredibly important to large companies like New York Life. So nothing is more frustrating, in addition to the legal side, is InsurTech not knowing about their own insurance coverage. Go figure. So definitely spend some time hiring folks that can support you with that. And then one other final piece of advice is, as much as it's important for companies like New York Life to understand the startup sales cycle, it's equally as important for startups to understand the incumbent sales cycle. So for us, the review process that needs to take place, the checks and balances that we need to go through, and then that final sign-off process can be equally as long as what you guys all go through. So we're on the same page there.
So Brian, you're coming from a different perspective here. Advantage isn't usually an investor in startups, but you do a lot of work with startups. And from the standpoint of them being your customers, but also from the partnership standpoint as well. Could you explain exactly how you are working with startups?
So you're calling me the square peg in a round hole. Right. Really quickly, Vonage is an enterprise communications company. We provide unified communications, contact center, but most importantly, we provide communications APIs, which is where we interact most with startups today. I think where we sit well within this panel today is we're kind of at the crossroads between build and buy for insurers. Do they want to go and build utilizing communications APIs to build next generation mobile or desktop applications? One of the things that we do very well is our video APIs. We provide our video APIs that power 3 of the top 10 insurers with their remote visual inspection solutions. We have Verify APIs, 2FA APIs, and so the question becomes for investors, do I build or do I buy? And by buy, not only do we sell directly to insurers, we're also powering a lot of the startups that are building next generation communications applications with our APIs, whether that be voice, video, or SMS. So when we look at being part of the communication stack, the solutions that we have to deal with and when we're working with startups is making sure that from an adoption and utilization of their solution is making sure that those startups are looking holistically at the communication stack between customer and provider, because they're going to be a piece, they're going to be a module, I think as someone brought up on the panel earlier, within a greater communication dialogue between a customer and that provider, whether it be voice escalating to video, whether it be SMS escalating to voice. They may be a bit part of it, but if they don't have a full understanding of that full customer journey, they're going to fall flat with any POC or any commercialization of their product.
Great, thank you. So let's transition now to a question about transition. That's taking your product from, or taking the concept in some cases from, you bought yourself a startup. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to bring this product through the organization, socialize it through the organization, incorporate it within the business processes, and bring it to market?
What's unique about New York Life Ventures is that we lead with our strategic side. So again, not just putting capital to work, focused on bringing those startup enterprises to the business within New York Life. And the whole process, we work incredibly closely with our business units. So to use the example, our head of benefits on implementing our student loan repayment program. And that includes not only just understanding the ecosystem, so understanding all the startups in this instance that are focused on student loan repayment, but helping them to understand the use case. What are the ROI opportunities? What are the success criteria that we want to focus on? And acting as their partner throughout that whole process from POC to implementation. And for us, what's also unique is that we really believe in deferral of credit. So making sure that our business units are the ones that are getting the check mark and the props for the hard work that they've done. New York Life Ventures didn't implement Student Loan Genius for our team necessarily, but we're working with them to understand how they can just benefit from that as well.
I think one of the important things, and I think Oleg brought up a great example earlier, when you're talking about POCs and bringing them to commercialization, I think one of the greatest hindrances to that, where you start to see customers who have a 3-month, a 6-month, a 3-year POC, a lot of that is what we see are scope creeps, and they go in with a POC to achieve a certain goal, a certain KPI, and then once it's implemented, they say, oh, well, can we? And then, oh, well, can we is always going to be an additional 3, 6, 9 months of additional work time. And as long as the tech company, the partner, is willing to entertain those scope creeps and not get that POC implemented or commercialized, they will sit stagnant for years. They will never see the light of day. They will never go to beta, let alone alpha. They're always going to be a POC. There's always going to be one of probably 60 POCs that are within the organization, and will continue to get deprioritized.
So let me stay with you. How important is executive sponsorship? How important is it you have the senior management committed to the process and want to see it come to fruition?
It's critical, and I think one of the things, having been in the communication space for so long, I think one of the major faults of the POCs today is that of yesteryear it was always, does the technology work? 9 out of 10 times today the technology works, and so we have to get over that hurdle. And so for us, it's what are you trying to accomplish? What is your end game, and what is the customer experience? It's about adoption and utilization. So as an API business, we don't get paid unless the solution, or the partner doesn't get paid unless there's utilization of that solution. most solutions today sit in the cloud. If your solution is not getting adopted or utilized, it's going to get ripped out as fast as the other cloud provider that was in before you. And so it's defining what that end game is going to be and finding a champion for it. If you don't have that champion who's going to drive that because it is critical to their business, and when you look at, I'll be very, very selfish, in the communication space, and you're solving for a new channel within an omni-channel environment, I have to make sure that solution is going to drive a certain level of utilization, a certain level of customer satisfaction. It's going to drive higher NPS, not lower NPS. It's going to get rid of, it's going to be first call resolution. It's going to be significantly higher. There has to be something that executive wants to drive that is a deficit for them and a major challenge. Once you've identified that and you've identified that executive, it gets a lot easier and critical when we're moving these forward.
You're shaking your hand. You agree?
Definitely, there's no implementation without a business unit sponsor. And again, as I mentioned before, New York Life Ventures is not owning the implementation. We're deferring the credit and the ownership and the longevity of that implementation to our business unit. So without that, again, you're just stuck in POCL over and over again.
So Darren, let me ask you, I think especially in the insurance business and the other regulated industry, probably entrepreneurs who haven't been in those roles don't really underestimate the regulatory hurdles that you have to overcome. There's always going to be compliance issues, there's always going to be legal issues that probably were not even fully contemplated by the startups when they got into this business. What can the insurance carrier do to kind of smooth the way and make that process more viable and easier for the startups?
So first, be taking the time on the front end to devote resources, whether it's personnel or it's funding, to the project. The carriers I've seen struggle the most are those that dabble. They try to take people that have a full-time job, not working in the tech space, and they tack on an hour a day and try to help this startup launch. And what ends up happening is emails go unanswered for weeks, and things die for the vine. Also, take a look at what your standard processes are and see if they really translate to the tech space. Folks are talking about standard contracts. Take a look at your contracts and learn what provisions are required by law, what provisions are must-haves, which are nice-to-haves, and then communicate those early and often to the startup so they can bake it into the process.
Great, thank you. We've got time for a few of the questions that were asked. And David, I want to ask you, Victor talked about some of the financial criteria and looking at a startup opportunity and how to evaluate the financial viability of the return that you expect to get from that. Let's look at it from the people side. What would you look at in terms of the team that you're buying into?
So the team obviously is the core of the product, and similar to how we think about our agents, actually we have an agent in the front of the room. Our agents are our product, not our life insurance, and I would argue that the team, with the startups that we're engaging with, the founders are equally, if not more important than the actual product. So what are their backgrounds? What are their experience? Have they had successful exits before? Do they understand the pain points that your business has? Can they work to solve that? So super important.
Another question, looking from sort of the opposite side of what we talked about earlier in terms of how do you identify viable prospects and prospects of opportunities. If you are a startup and you want to understand what carriers are going to be the best ones to approach, Victor, how would you suggest that they go about understanding what your needs are and how would they go about approaching you?
Sure. So for us, it's important to be aligned on the mission. Aligning on the mission doesn't mean that necessarily they have to have the same culture. We understand that just because somebody fits well strategically with us doesn't mean that they have to work the same way as we do. But the first step is to be aligned and to have the same purpose. Just to go back to the insurance example, if you just read the definitions, like the company's mission statements, and they were written before we start talking to them, they look and feel the same. Like both us and insurance, we have a common mission to make individuals' lives better and to focus on financial wellness. And that's something that existed even before we started the conversation, and that's something that was almost an immediate chemistry between the two companies. So I think as a startup is to really find the carrier that shares a similar vision and a similar mission with you. Culture also matters, but in our case, there are a lot of things that we would like to change as a carrier based on the culture that we see at a startup. To give an example, one thing that Assurance's Chief Strategy Officer told me when we talked about how they make decisions, she said that they don't spend a lot of time debating ideas. And that's very differently than what we do. Right? We like to measure at times and at once. We have meetings, we debate, we turn presentations a lot of times. What they do is they just test them. They would like to fail fast. They measure, cut, and by doing so, they find new things. So even though from that standpoint the culture wasn't exactly the same, there's something that we would like to emulate. So also in addition to the mission alignment, try to find what sort of culture does a carrier want to aspire to, and if your startup has that culture in terms of moving with speed, testing and learning, approaching things differently, I think that's something that's going to be very appealing to a carrier wanting to expand as a partnership.
Great, thank you. We have some other questions, but we've run out of time, so you may want to grab our panelists afterwards. So, panelists, thank you very much. That was a great discussion, and thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you everyone for coming. You've quickly made InsurTech New York one of the fastest growing InsurTech communities in the U.S. And please another round of applause for all of our wonderful moderators. Everybody enjoy the rest of the evening, networking, and having a good time, and hopefully getting some business done. Thank you very much, and hope to see you guys in March.
Thank you so much. How do you start?